Hey, so we're in chapter 8 of Isaiah, and just going to go ahead and get started with verse 1. I'll read probably 1 through 4. So, Assyria will invade the land. Verse 1. Moreover, the Lord said to me, take a large scroll and write on it with a man's pen concerning Mahir Shalal Hashbaz, that's Isaiah's other son. And I will take for myself faithful witnesses to record Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. No, Jeberechiah. Okay, so I demolish all these names. So anyway, um, so these verses are going to predict the fall of the northern kingdom. So um, what he's saying here is he's telling Isaiah to get a big scroll and write this down for everybody to see. So he writes a message on a large sign in a public place, and he's writing it so that all could read it. So this is God's warning to the people. And Mahir Shalah Hashbaz, that is Isaiah's second son, and his name is prophetic also, and I'll give you the meaning here in just a minute. So um, basically, what he's saying in these verses is that Pekah of Israel and Rezin of Syria, they're going to be done for, right? So, verse 3, he says, then I went into the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, call his name Mahir Shalah Hashbaz. For before the child shall have the knowledge to cry my mother, or cry my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away before the king of Assyria. So Damascus being the head of Syria, and Samaria being the head of the northern kingdom. So they're both going to be done. Um, so his son's name, like remember his son Shear Jashab, means the remnant shall return, and Mahir's name means swift to plunder and quick to spoil. So they're both prophetic. So, and God told Isaiah to name his son before he was even born. So, all right, so by the time before the child can say my mother or father, then Syria and the northern kingdom are going to be done for. Verse 5. The Lord also spoke to me again, saying, inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloah that flow softly, and rejoice in Rezin and in Remaliah's son. So I'll stop there for a second. That was verse 6. So God is telling Isaiah, waters of Shiloah mean like peace, waters of peace and welcoming. And rather than the people rejoicing in the waters of peace and welcoming and in God, they are trying to rejoice over this alliance between Pekah and Rezin in Syria in the northern kingdom. So they're trying to put their hope in that instead of God. And he's saying, this is what he's going to do to them. All right. So basically, he's telling them, don't get involved in these alliances because I'm going to take care of them. They're not even going to exist. So, all right. So the people refuse the waters of peace, Shiloah, that flow softly, and rejoice in Rezin and in Remaliah's son, Pekah. Verse 7, now therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, the king of Assyria and all his glory. He will go up over all the channels and go over all his banks. The waters of the river, strong and mighty, he's speaking of the Euphrates here, and east of the Euphrates is where the Assyrians were from, and so he's speaking of them. So the waters of the river, my note here says it indicates the Euphrates, east side of the Euphrates was Assyria, so he's referring to Assyria strong and mighty, they're going to swallow them. So I also have a note here. It says, Arch voices, although he gives us freedom to make them, if we ignore his love and guidance, results in sin and invites his wrath, which the in both kingdoms fell subject to. So, um, yeah, that was just a note that I had written in there. Verse 8. He will pass through Judah, he will overflow and pass over, he will reach up the neck, and the stretching out of his wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Verse 9. Be shattered, O you peoples, and be broken in pieces. Give ear, all you from far countries, gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak the word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. So, I've told you before that Isaiah's writing was like the highest level of Hebrew writing. He was very poetic, and obviously, English doesn't do it justice. So I don't know Hebrew that I've read where his writing was like very poetic. So you can tell here, like when he says, gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. And that's kind of, it starts to get a poetic type sense with it. So he's selling a very unpopular view here, and people don't like him. They call him a traitor because he's telling them to put God first and the king second. So not very popular right now. All right, so he was going against what everyone was saying and doing, and he was trying to warn them. He's telling them not to be afraid of their threats because God is going to take care of them, and they're not going to win over Judah. So, but the people chose instead to believe in the alliance and not in God. So, fear God, heed his word. That's the caption. I'm going to start at verse 11 here. For the Lord spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, verse 12, do not say a conspiracy concerning all that this people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. Let him be your fear, let him be your dread. He will be as a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and rock of offense. So I'll stop there for a second and I'll finish that up here in a minute. So he is saying basically you need to fear God and not these people. And a lot of times, we let fear control our lives. And these people were scared, so they were trying to put their faith in this alliance. And he's saying, forget that, I'm taking them down. So, so we don't need to be afraid of what man can do to us, but fear God, who is able to cast both our soul and spirit into hell. And that is in Luke 12, 4 through 5. And that's heavy. So don't fear anyone that's here or around you or just a mere man. Fear God because he can cast you into hell for eternity. So very heavy. And so 14, as we go through Isaiah, you'll find passages sound super familiar, and that's because a lot of the New Testament writers, they studied this. This was their grounds for everything that they wrote about. So they knew these scriptures, and so they quote things a lot of times, and a lot of people quote Isaiah. So, so we'll hit stone of stumbling again, because that's really important. So verse 14, he will be a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So he's talking to both houses of Israel now. He's talking to Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom, and he's combining them together. Um, and it says that he will be a stone of stumbling. So, a stone of stumbling, as you might know if you've been in your Bible, refers to Christ. And he's referred to that several times. And I have a note here that says, Paul in 1 Corinthians 1:23 through 24, he says, we preach Christ crucified, and to the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. So where this comes from is the Jews thought that Christ was going to be this conquering king, political person that was going to take David's royal seat, and he was just going to conquer everything with signs and miracles and all this stuff. Um, so that's why they choose not to believe in Christ. And they didn't want to believe the good news of Christ, and they called it foolishness. So that's what he's saying here, is that, Jesus is going to be a stumbling block to the Jews. And also, in 1 Corinthians, he talks about the Greeks as well. Well, the Greeks didn't think that, they thought Christ was foolish because they were comparing him to their mythological, gods and goddesses, all those idols that they worshipped, okay? Um, they seen him as a humble servant, and he was crucified like a criminal, and to them, death was defeat. So they didn't consider his good news as well. So God's calling this foolishness, and he's going to be as a stumbling block to them. Okay, excuse me. So this also obviously has a local application and a future application, as a lot of this prophetic stuff does. So he's speaking to both the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom, and he's also speaking prophetically for the future. So, stumbling block to the Jew. Then I wrote about the local application here. The rock of offense. And I'm going to hop over to 1 Corinthians 10 here. Sorry. Okay, 1 through 4. So, Paul's talking here, and he says, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, that all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So he tells us here who the rock is, and the rock represents Christ in a lot of Testament. So not only does the stumbling block refer to Christ, but the rock refers to Christ as well. So we see in Daniel chapter 2, the cornerstone cut without hands. And also, if you're familiar with the book of Exodus, where God led Israel out of Egypt, they're in the desert, and he tells Moses to smite the rock because the people are thirsty. Well, that is like a foretelling of Christ. So Christ was smitten for us, and living waters flow from him to quench our thirst. Okay, so that was kind of like almost like an idiom in a way. So he is the rock. All right, I'm gonna go back to Isaiah here. Like I said, Isaiah's got a lot of messianic stuff in it. So all right, he will be a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. 15, and many among them shall stumble, they shall fall and be broken, be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, And I will wait on the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Here, here am I and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. So, what Isaiah is saying here is him and his children are for signs for the people. And because their names are prophetic, obviously, and God told him to name his kids these things. So Shear, of course, as the remnant will be returning, and Mahir as coming judgment. So, all right, so we'll move on to verse 19 here. And when they say to you, seek those who are mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And I'll stop right there for a second because this is important. So, 19 through 22, what we're talking about is psychics and channelers. And what he's saying here is there is no light in them. So, I'm going to hop over to Deuteronomy real quick and read that to you in the laws. It's Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 12. So the caption says, avoid wicked customs. When you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire, which today we could call abortion because this was child sacrifice. And I think that's probably modernly today, I consider it abortion. Anyway, so pass through the fire, or anyone who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you. So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about conjurers, witches, spiritists. When he talks about I don't know if he says it in this version, there shall be found among you. In one of the versions, I think it's King James Version, I was reading, he talks about an observer of the times. And an observer of the times is basically like astrology. So zodiac, anybody that, reads their sign and goes off of that junk, that's all basically witchcraft. So there is, interestingly enough, there's something called the Mazzaroth, and before like the zodiac or whatever, and it was paganized at Babel. But basically, the Mazzaroth was stars, constellations that the ancient people told the story of God's redemption through Messiah, Jesus Christ, to their children. And it was a reminder of what his redemption was going to be. That was called the Mazzaroth. There's all kinds of studies on that. There's books on that. But so basically, it was kind of like the Zodiac before it got paganized, but not exactly. So, but anywho, the Zodiac is pagan. It's witchcraft as far as astrology is too. So, these things are called entries, okay? And something interesting about that is, I know people who have went to psychics. I've had friends from work that I don't work with anymore, but they, would get together in groups and go to psychics and mediums, and those people are witches, and there's no light in them, and the scripture clearly tells us there is no light in them. So they're talking to demons. They're not talking to your family. And anybody, just a warning, anybody that tries to conjure a spirit in order to try to give you info or try to heal you, They're not. They're talking to demons. You're dealing with demons. So that's just a note and a warning. So, um, some of these people will even claim to be Christian, and they're not. So, anyway, um, interesting thing, the movie The Exorcist. So, someone actually tried to debunk the stuff that happened in that movie that they acted out or whatever. But it actually turned out that it was a development of several case studies. And the guy who made the movie really did his homework. So they weren't actually able to debunk it. So these entries are like extremely dangerous. So should stay away from them. All right. So we'll go back to Isaiah here. If I can type. All right. So verse 20. To the law, I think that's where I left off. Yeah. To the law and testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because there's no light in them. And that's basically it. There's no light in them. They're talking to demons, and you're dealing with demons and spirits. So, verse 21, they will pass through it hard pressed and hungry, and it shall happen when they are hungry that they will be enraged and curse their king and their God and look upward. Then they will look to the earth and see trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be driven into darkness. So after rejecting God and his plan for them, they blame it on him. Their trouble, their trials, they blame it all. They blame it all on him. And I think people consistently blame God for their situations, their life situations, even though it's their choices that put them there. And I think, not only did that apply then, but it applies today. So that's something that should pay attention to. So I also made a note here. We're finishing up, but verse of the day, and it actually came up on my Bible app. So Romans 12:12, be rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, and continuing steadfastly in prayer. So no matter what your life looks like today, no matter what your situation or circumstances today, be ever rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, and continuing steadfastly in prayer, which is something that I need to work on all the time. So, okay, well, be blessed. Have a good day.